Thank you for joining me on the Southern Report once again. It's a real privilege to have your viewing company. I know I say this every time, and I mean it every time, but I am about to bring on a wonderful guest, and I'm privileged to have a sit down and have a conversation with him, and we will get straight into that. So I'm just going to bring on Jon Wedger, and I thank him very much for his time. Jon, thank you so much for joining me. It's very much appreciated, my friend.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Not at all. Jon, I thought I would start off with some scripture, if you don't mind, because I think it's
Please.
very apt. It describes where we're at and also describes the incredible work that you have done for many years and what you've then come against. So Ephesians 6 makes it very clear. Ephesians 6 verse 10. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Jon, the Bible makes it very clear, and I know that I believe in some of the interviews that you've done, and also with the book that I flagged up at the beginning, that you passionately believe in that too. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in that book, there's a comment when you go and read the description of it. It talks about the spiritual battle that we are in. Jon, what are your first thoughts on that? I'm very aware of. You've been in the Metropolitan Police over 30 years. You retired in 2016. And I've been honored to listen to a number of your interviews to learn about you and the incredible work that you've been doing. But to say that you've been through a lot, respectfully, is an understatement. What say you, sir?
Well, I mean, when I first went on this journey, I mean, I joined the police in the early 90s with all the hope of having a really progressive career. You know, I had these ideas in my head, and things went really well. I mean, I was brought up in a very much a Catholic household. I went to a Catholic school. My father's family, he comes from an Anglo-Italian background. They took it very, very serious. I mean, my nan even had an altar in her bedroom, you know, and my mum she converted to Catholicism to be my dad. I went to a Catholic school and everything else. Um, be, Being a Catholic at the time did help me, but it was only when I actually became a born again Christian that I was really fully able to take this fight on. Before I and my journey to Christianity is, I mean, you know, you read from Ephesians, and there's quite a few things that I quote, especially to survivors of abuse. But one of the ones I always say is, and it's not so much a biblical quote, but it's God has a sense of humour. And my life is nothing but irony all the way through. And I will explain that. And it really shows me that what we worship is a loving God, a God of no judgment at all. And it's the same when we look at the criminality that attacks children. The other side doesn't care who it tackles. It doesn't care what class they're from, what background they're from. It's not interested. It just wants to crush their soul. And the devil does it by destroying innocence. That is my experience. It's a destruction of innocence. Um, and when I went through, you know, my career, it was a really was a good one. And it was when I ended up having children. I took on children that weren't mine. My missus left me with all the kids. So my journey became very child centric. But at the same time that I was burdened down with looking after kids and trying to juggle that with a very, very demanding career, that I by default entered into the world of investigating child abuse. I never thought that I would ever really make a difference. A lot of policing, you don't make a difference. You'll never, you know, you're just reinventing the wheel, as it were, until you start dealing with child abuse. And something very profound happens. because your actions do make a difference, and they really do. You actually do save lives. But when you start looking into it and you start trying to crush it, this opposition appears, and it appears out of nowhere. And for me, it came under the veil of respectability of senior officers, pressure from the Home Office, which went all the way up to the centre of government, and it's dashed all my whole sort of education belief system that we actually are in, you know, a very decent democratic country. We operate by the rule of law. We have one of the best judicial systems in the world. And then you realise hiding behind that is a malevolence, is a darkness that is so intense, and it will crush you if you get in its way. And it actually did start to crush me. Bit by bit, I was slowly going under on every single level. And I realised then that, you know, there was a darkness attached to it. And I saw with the survivors of abuse how damaged they were, you know, right to their core, and how that damage led on to their offspring and their grandchildren. And I'm not in any way denigrating survivors of abuse. I come in a position where I advocate for survivors of abuse. And I then entered into this battle that I just did not understand. I really was being sort of slaughtered, and I was threatened by a senior officer that I lose my home, my job, and my children if I continued my investigation into the criminality of kids from care homes being taken out and pimped out. We hear this term grooming gangs and all that, you know, like it's some sort of chic, on vogue new thing. There's nothing new in it. The only thing new now is the ethnicity. You know, the Kashmiri minicab driver Pakistani that we hear about grooming gangs, they're just the new kids on the block. And actually, they're just a microcosm. And while we're concentrating on them, we're actually ignoring really what's going on. At the moment, we're blaming Muslim grooming gangs. Let me tell you and your viewers something. This is bigger and more darker and more sinister than a load of dysfunctional cab drivers from the foothills of the Himalayas. You know, this is ancient. What we're looking at is wickedness in high office. So the Ephesians says wickedness in high office. We are looking things that are dictating global policies, which have such strong blackmail value that they can determine if a country stands or a country falls. And we are on about not witchcraft at its highest level, which is called Satanism. And one of the things the government never talks about is a thing called SRA, Satanic Ritual Abuse. There was, I'm one of a line of police whistleblowers. And I now do it in the name of Jesus Christ. I don't know whether the others do. That's their battle, not mine. But there was one guy. His name was Mike Veal, and he was a chief constable of Wiltshire Police, a whole police force. And Wiltshire is where they have Marlborough and the parliamentary residence, as was then Ted Heath, the former Prime Minister. And Mike Veal boldly and righteously stood up and said that if Ted Heath was alive today, he would be standing trial for serious offences against children. We're talking of rapes of young boys. Right? But he also said there is evidence that links Ted Heath to ritual abuse. There was another whistleblower called Lenny Harper who investigated the sinister goings on at a kids' home called Haute de la Garenne on the island of Jersey.
Yeah.
And Jersey is a place which has the feudal system. So, you know, this thing, what we see with Braveheart, with William Wallace standing up against, you know, Longshanks and the British feudal system, when it's alive and well in the Channel Islands. It's a centre of commerce, you know. It's a very, very wealthy bit of acreage stuck just off the Normandy coast. And Lenny Harper, he uncovered that children were taken from the mainland, put in this residential care home. They were sexually abused, they were tortured, and ritualistic abuse went on. and he found in the basement where the kids said these rituals went on, he found human remains, human skulls. And then that was rubbish by the establishment, the heart of the establishment, which again links back to exactly what you said, high office. And you're right, it is high office. And why do they do it? Well, there's no blood in hell. It's blood rituals. This is ancient. This is Baal worship. This is a worship of the devil himself. And if the truth ever come out, I think people would have heart attacks. They refuse to believe it. They will watch Hammer House of horror films. There's just a new Dracula film come out. You know, they've been telling us exactly what they've been doing. It is about blood. There is life in the blood. The demons demand the blood. When Jesus went into the temple and he whipped the moneylenders, they were also doing sacrifice of doves, you know, to their deities. It was just paganism of the highest level. There was usury going on, you know, which causes slavery, you know, interest on a debt, which Christianity stands against. Yet we see it everywhere. We see people committing suicide and crippled in debt. We see nations sinking into poverty where human trafficking and organ harvesting is, you know, is rife because of usury. Islam stands against it, but Christianity stands against it. Jesus whipped them with knotted rope that he soaks in salted water. And he also battered, you know, the dove sellers. And to a mockery of Christ, all you've got to do now is pick up a credit card, flip it onto the magnetic strip at the back, and you will see a hologram of a dove. They're still doing it. It hasn't gone anywhere. This is high office once again. You know, the height of the banking is still doing the dove worship that Jesus fought against. Yet no one takes a stand against it now. We just accept it as a norm. And it's the same as child abuse. There's this cognitive dissonance that comes in. You know, when I was really fighting for these kids, and there were children as young as 9 years old being taken from places of so-called safety, and they were just blatantly pimped out in the streets, and no one, and I mean no one, was intervening. No one was that shield to protect, you know, the wolf from the prey. There was no thin blue line protecting it. And I became that thin blue line. And I actually said, no, this is wrong. There was a judge involved. There was police officers involved. Again, high office. It went on in high office. This wasn't Kashmiri minicab drivers. Yeah. This was high office. And these kids were hemorrhaging. And they were all subject to care orders. And I was threatened with the loss of my home, my job and children. But I continued to speak out. And I then suffered the wrath of very, very senior officers. And maybe it went higher than that because, like I just mentioned, Mike Ville was a chief constable and he was attacked in the same manner as me, and as was Lenny Harper. And they were officers of much higher ranking than me. So it comes from a very, very senior place. You know, it comes from the intelligence services and maybe above. They have a unilateral agreement, these perverts. I then suffered my bank being shut down. All right, I was warned by Lenny Harper that they'll interfere with your financial affairs. My bank foreclosed on me. I couldn't get any money out. There was an attempt to put my youngest child in care. In amongst this, I think it's related, and I think this was a wickedness in operation. There was 9 cases put against me, false allegations to imprison me. I stood up and basically said, do what you want, because I will beat every single one. And eventually they all got thrown out. But in amongst that, one of my children suffered a life-threatening, life-changing accident. And he lay in a coma for many months. And at one point, he suffered sepsis and his organs packed up, and he had a cardiac arrest, and he died. He was dead. For 10 minutes, the first response team from the intensive care unit, there was 3 consultants on there, and they performed CPR on him. He had a severe spinal injury that he would not recover from. It was severed by 96%. He had paralysis from his eyes downward. There was never, ever a chance he would walk. And whilst they were doing CPR, they aggravated this injury and they made his disability worse. He suffered lack of oxygen for 10 minutes, causing severe brain injury. And he was only kept alive by 100% life support, 100% life support, because there was an algorithm present. So he was given the obligatory 5 days of 100% life support, which was each time they inflated his lungs, they ruptured his lungs to pieces, the alveoli would be burst. So his lungs would be of no use anyway. If he was to survive that, which there was no way he was surviving it, his life expectancy would be incredibly short. He would be brain damaged and he would have almost 100% paralysis. You know, it was a pointless existence. So in amongst that, I stood by his side for 3 days. And I was a Catholic. I believed I was doing God's work, standing up for the children. I thought that there was this, you know, St. Paul's an amazing man. And again, in Ephesians, we look at the armour of God. You know, it's not the armour of God, it's the full armour of God, the full armour of God. And Catholicism didn't give me the full armour of God. It dictated to me what I should and shouldn't learn. And it didn't encourage me really to progress my journey into Jesus, really. I didn't know Jesus. That's the essence of it. On the third day, when my son was subject to the personal care, they went and they cleaned him, and it was pointless. They shouldn't have bothered, but they had to change certain dressings in his throat and things like that. And I went into the chapel, a multi-faith chapel, where they had the Islamic bit facing east, and because we're an ex-colony, and there's a lot of doctors that come from these colonial countries. You know, there was a lot of Indonesian doctors and Pakistanis, and you would regularly see them in this place going and doing their 5-day prayers and whatever. And I was angry with God. I had total anger and maybe contempt. I don't know what it was, but I was angry. I was angry that this had happened to me. I was doing God's work. How dare I be subject to this? What is going on? Where is the justice? And this was a massive lesson that I needed to learn. And this will be relevant in a minute. I try and keep the chronology, the timeline going here. And I decided that I was going to have a fight. I thought I want to punch someone's head in. So I started really sort of mocking and verbally abusing someone that was praying to Allah. You know, I just was vile. And then there was the Veda book, and there was a little section of this room put aside for the Hindus, and there was a couple of Indian nurses that were lighting something. And again, I said, what a ridiculous religion. It's just stupid, worshipping these weird animals. And I was just ignorant and vile. But again, I just wanted a response, and no one was responding. And a security guard got called, and he was a great big Sudanese guy. So I then decided to have a go at the black community for this baby mother, baby father culture. So I decided to be racist towards him. And the guy didn't respond. He was huge. He was a really big guy. Sudanese are quite big fellas, and he just watched me. And he stood in the room because someone had reported that there was a man going crazy in the chapel. I then had a go at God, and I said, "How can you do this? These people abuse their children. They get put in care. They don't care for their kids. You know, these other people come into their lives because they're not protecting them, and they abuse them sexually, and they end up on the streets being abused. And then people like me make it our job to say no. And I'm looking at losing my job. I'm looking at going to prison. I'm looking at losing my house because I can't pay my mortgage because the bank won't give me any money. The police stop paying me. And now I've got a son that's dying. And if I go to prison, my kids are going the ones that are still of age at school. There was 2 of them still at school age. They're going into care. I'm going to lose it all for what? Protecting kids because these other people decided to sexually abuse their children. So I was going mad, and I was really just mocking God. And then I picked up the Bible, and I was going to open it and just mock the Bible, really. And you got to understand, you know, I was a believer in God, but I had to learn a lesson. I had to be humbled, and I had to understand the strength of Jesus Christ. And the strength of Jesus Christ is in love. And this is something I was instantly about to learn. The Bible just fell open. And it fell open on Psalm 23. And as I read it, it hit me. And it says on there, I will lay a place for you at the table of thine enemies. And I realised God had put me sat at a table with my enemies. He'd done that. But then he goes on to say, you will walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And I am. I'm walking through a valley that's leading to death of my own son. And then he puts a little footnote, but you will fear no evil. And he tells you that he is with you with that whole journey. And I thought, you've done this to me on purpose. You are testing me. You have put me at a table of pure evil. And you're telling me, you put me there and you're telling me not to fear it. And this was purely, Psalm 23 is purely about faith. Absolutely strong faith, and you will get through this. You know, and he is with you all the way. You know, with the other religions, you have to bow down to them. But Jesus walks with you. He walks by your side. You know, he's not in front of you. He doesn't want you laying prostrate on the floor, not even looking at him. He carries that cross with you. And then it flipped open, and I started reading the book of Matthew, and then I went on to Mark and others, and then I started reading about the millstone, right? You know, and what he would do to people, you know, that abuse kids. But also then I started reading about the Good Shepherd, that he will leave the flock in the middle of the night, the darkest of the night, and he will go after that one sheep that is so stupid, so disregarding of his rules, and it will wander off. But the 99 will remain loyal and decent, you know, and they'll just stay there. But he will leave them, and he will go out after the one that is lost. And I thought, you really are, that is the Good Shepherd. This is not a man who's just dictating to us. This is a man against all odds, is putting, is preaching into practice beyond what we could ever imagine. And then I realised, you really are the Good Shepherd. This is what it's about. You want us to be the shepherd with you. You want us to go out there and do what you did, you know, and put faith in you and leave behind the comfort and go out there against all odds for those that don't listen and bring them back into your loving fold where you will continue to love them. And I turned around to him and I said, Jesus, my son has done no wrong. He's kind. He's loyal. He's a nice boy. He's never hurt anyone. He's a beautiful son with a lot of love. He's dying. In fact, he's dead. And it was my intent after my rant to have a fight with someone and then go and kiss my son goodbye, because that I was going to go home. He's dead. He's gone. That's it, right? And I said, Jesus, if you give me my son, I'll be your good shepherd. I will go out and I'll look for the lost. But please give me my son back. And I fell on my knees, and I was just inconsolable with grief and with everything, but I fell on my knees. And then this, I don't know what it was, some sort of calm came over me, and the big Sudanese Muslim guy that I'd been shouting abuse at, he grabbed hold of me and he lifted me up. And I said, am I okay? He went, look, you are okay. You can't go carry on shouting like this. I said, no, I'm done. I said, my son's dying, and he went, come and I'll take you. And he took me back to the room. He led me, put his arm around me, and he took me back. And I went back into the intensive care, and my son wasn't just in intensive care, he was in the highest dependency little pod that they had, that was only room for one. And once you're in there, you die, and that's that. That's it, end of. And he's laying there, and he's dead, you know, and that's that. So I went up to him, and I kissed him in his left cheek, and I whispered in his ear, "You've no understanding how much I love you as a father. I love you. And when the light comes, you go to it in the name of Jesus. You promise me in the name of Jesus, you call out for Jesus. Because I know there's deception even on them last minutes, you know." And I said, "But I love you, son." And then as I went to walk away, his eyes opened and he mouthed with a ventilator pipe in there, "I love you, Dad." And I said, "Move your foot." And I looked down and his foot was moving. Move the other foot. His other foot moved. Grabbed my hand. He grabbed my hand. So I knew the spine was working, right? I left that hospital, and 2 weeks later, that boy walked out of that hospital,
Wow.
He now teaches snowboarding to disabled kids. He's a
Wow.
manager of a store. He went on to have a child. He's about to have his second child. He went on to pass his driving tests, and he became a born-again Christian. You know, Jesus delivered straight away. Jesus delivered. But when I went back home from the hospital, there was a car waiting outside my house, and there were two detectives, and they arrested me for child neglect. Because whilst I was with my dying son, I left my 15-year-old boy at home with my 23-year-old son. And the Met Police, as a last sort of kick in the guts, they decided to take me down. So people think that when you're in your lowest ebb, the hand of God's going to save you. But in reality, the devil stamps all over you. You have to have faith and stand up. When you go down, you must get up. And you get up in his name. And you will get up. And you will. But it made me realise the dirty tricks of the devil. There is not one level that he doesn't know that he won't try and take you down, because he knows who you are. Right, and he knows exactly how your mind works. He's ancient. He's wise beyond words. But it's all about taking us down. But I stood my ground, and I thought, right, I'm going to get arrested now, and that's it. But then I realised that the fear had gone. My fear had gone. I didn't fear them anymore. So I just said, well, you do what you've got to do. You do exactly what you've got to do. Well, they walked away and did nothing. Right? They dropped it. They did nothing. You know, within a matter of days, every case against me was thrown out of the court system. I had all my back pay reinstated. I got pensioned off. The house I was going to lose, I paid the mortgage off. And my son walked home. He came home. He walked through the door. I mean, 2 weeks prior to that, it was a different story. And it was faith and only faith. But I was not a born-again Christian. So one day I'm walking past a church, and I ended up down in the south coast of England. I'm a London boy, but anyway. And there's a bang on the window, and there's a pastor, and he beckons me in to this Christian church. It wasn't never my scene, the Christian thing. It was a bit too intense for me, and I didn't really get it, and all that. So he said he was a full-blown Jamaican with a real twangy Caribbean accent, and he said, "Boy," he said, "what are you involved in?" And I went, "I don't know, or I don't understand what you said. You've upset someone." I went, "Yeah, I've definitely done that." He said, "All I saw was a rabbit being ripped apart by wolves." He said, "Have you been baptized?" I went, "Yeah, I'm not Catholic." He went, "I don't mean that. Are you born again?" I had no idea what that even meant, you know. I went, "I don't know what you mean." He went, "You need to be born again. You can't carry on this journey." He said, the demons are ripping you apart. You will not survive this. And he said, "But listen, give me your number. Someone will be in touch." So I gave him my phone number. A day later, a guy called Brian Knox rings me. Brian Knox, for anyone who doesn't know, I compel you, Google KNOX. If you want to listen to a testimony, that is one testimony. Brian Knox was one of the most dangerous men in Scotland. He was heavily involved in the organised crime scene, drug importer, enforcer, ex-Royal Marine, ex-martial artist, knew how to handle himself, a very, very dangerous, evil man that was heavily involved in prostitution, drug importation, everything. Anyway, born again Christian now, and you know, a soldier for Christ, like you've never known. You know, he's flipped the criminality and gone full blown into Jesus. Anyway, he rings me and he said, "Look, I'll send you my testimony. Watch my testimony." So I watched it, and I was amazed. It was like a Hollywood film. You know, you think, what a plot, what a twist. You know, what an ending. And he said, "Right, you need to come down to Bexhill-on-Sea next Sunday, going to baptise you. Get yourself down there." So I go down and I get baptised. Brian Knox has stood trial for murder twice, right? And he's been remanded for it as well. I get baptised by Brian Knox, you know, a gangster, you know, maybe an accused murderer, drug enforcer, everything you can imagine. He baptises me with a guy called Martin. Martin's an ex-heroin addict from the streets of Glasgow, born again Christian, and it was just ironic. There's me, the copper, being baptised by a murderer and a junkie, you know, my enemies. And that was the start of my Christian journey. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? And then one day I watched the television, and there's a guy called Bill Maloney, and again, a tough guy from the streets of Peckham, hard man, brought up in the care system. He's only one of a couple of his siblings survived. All the others are dead through lifestyle, addiction, suspicious deaths as well. And Bill is probably the #1 campaigner for the rights of child abuse survivors. Talk about a tough guy. He really is a tough guy. And I saw him on the telly. I then went and met with him, and he said, "We'll team up with me then." He said, "Use your skills and go out there and take testimonies of all the people that have been abused." So I did. I called it Voice for the Voiceless. I teamed up with Bill, you know, an ex-criminal. But he proclaimed himself as a soldier of Christ, and he certainly is. And he's a fearless man. He's a beautiful, beautiful man. And he went, Jesus has brought us together, and went out there. And what I did was I used my investigative skills. I was a specialist interrogator, interviewer. And I just went on to interview people that had come from the care system. And while they ended up there, and they ended up in prison, armed robbery, doing time for murder, whatever it might be, because they were sexually abused. And it just spiraled. The first video I did got 2.2 million hits. I didn't expect it. But then something happened that out of 10 people I'd interview, 1 in 10 would say the same thing. They were different. There was something different about them. They had an ability to sort of be totally vacate their mindset and change their personalities very quickly. And we used to call it multiple personalities, but the modern day term is DID, dissociated identity disorder. And 1 in 10 had this DID, and they all said the same thing, and it was satanic ritual abuse. They all said the same. The damage done to them was in a profound level I've never come across before. But their testimonies was something that was quite unique to me as well. And it was horrific. And then I got in touch with a woman called Audrey Harper. And she wrote a book called Dances with the Devil. And she's a Christian now. She's been on the telly a few times. But she was a practitioner of Satanism. And she openly admits that she was involved in the sacrifice of children. And they all said the same. It was a sacrifice of children. Children were sacrificed. One woman called Caroline, she now is a therapist. Well, she's a retired therapist now, but her parents were Satanists. and she was made to sacrifice newborn babies, let their blood. She would go into incredible detail of how they would do it, and all of them said the same. They all said the same, that, you know, as children, they were brought into these rituals. A runaway kid or a prostitute would sell her newborn baby. A street prostitute would sell her baby for £2,000 to this coven, and they would hold a ritual, and it was usually for someone to be promoted or for some position of power to occur, business deal, whatever it might be. I've even heard of one world champion boxer who's now a committed Christian, who only went to Christianity because he was so heavily involved in witchcraft in order to achieve that status, power and privilege. A lot of these rituals would take place in ecclesiastical settings, so that churches, they will quote from the Bible. One of the popular quotes they use from the Bible is the book of Isaiah, and they call it the 5 I wills. When the devil exalts himself, I will rise above the clouds, I will this, I will that. The last one is, I will be like the Most High. That is quoted a lot in rituals. Also, a lot of Hindu deities are worshipped in these rituals as well. A lot of them say about Kali and Shiva are venerated and worshipped in the rituals. A lot of pagan gods, I've heard of rituals done to Bacchus, to Odin, to many others. And one thing they do though, they might worship these various deities from different religions, but their adversary is singular. It's not polytheistic, right? And what it is, you hear the saying. Well, you don't hear the saying, more to the point. You never hear the saying anti-Islam, anti-Allah, anti-Buddha, anti-Shiva, anti-Krishna. You never hear that, but you do hear a saying anti-Christ, because these are anti-Christ, because Christ is their enemy. Islam is not their enemy. And I've never ever heard of any ritual in which they are frightened of the name Muhammad, or any of the Islamic prophets, not once. I've heard of Hindu deities being used as malevolence, but never as an antithesis to the darkness. But they all said that they did everything against Jesus. Everything was an attack on Jesus Christ. And what it does with these people, they disassociate as a way of coping. But because there are priests used in these rituals, and there are churches, because when you look at a lot of churches, a lot of these old Norman churches, ones you see in villages on hills, why are they there? They're there because they're old pagan temples. They took on old pagan temples. There are some churches that still have the pagan altars, the slaughter altars, and they just use the stonework and reincorporate it into the structure of the church. So they're built on very unhallowed ground with these pagan, antichrist blockwork, brickwork, masonry work still into the building. When they bombed London during the Second World War, they found these ancient relics, pagan relics, in some of these old churches. So, and of course, people then, as they get older, they would then, and I started speaking out on this, I would get attacked by survivors of real chronic child abuse. All child abuse is chronic, but the real intense, more ritualistic stuff. And they would say to me, you go on about Jesus. You're always on about Jesus. Well, where was Jesus? If he loves the children, like you say, where was he when I was being raped? You go on about freedom of choice. Where was my freedom of choice? They exercised their freedom of choice when they raped me and they made me kill the babies, because they would use the children to kill the babies. And it brings in a guilt and everything else and a silence. So where was Jesus? And this is where I was stumped by it, because they had a point, and they did have a point. And I think, yeah, you're right. But I thought the same when my son was dying. I thought, well, where is Jesus? Where is he? Why am I being punished? And mine was only a diluted version of what they went through. But then in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, he puts a stark warning out, because I realise these people have fallen away from Christ. They've fallen away because they haven't got that trust in Jesus. They feel profoundly let down. But when you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus says about that, anyone who causes the young ones, the small ones, to fall away from me, it is better that they put the millstone around their neck and jump into the depths of the sea. Well, that was it. I thought, this is it. This is exactly what Jesus was warning, what he was saying. He was saying, if for those doing that, the abusers, this is what they have to look forward to. The fact that they have done their free will, they've abused these kids, and they have taken them almost on a lifetime level away from Christ. But their punishment, I mean, who is going to survive, a 1 ton circular lump of limestone tied around their neck and throw? No one's going to survive that. And Jesus is telling me, you better do it yourself. So I don't know whether that is saying that's it, end of the game for you. You hurt the kids. And I could then use that bit of scripture and what I went through to say to them, look, Jesus never did this. Evil did this. Evil did this. And you see a lot of it in society. A lot of survivors, they become pagan. They go into the New Age. They go into the crystal, the Reiki healing. So many survivors are Reiki healers, right? I'm doing Reiki and I'm doing this. I even had one guy contact me, and he went, I really love what you're doing and how you speak out and all that. And he said, I am a survivor of ritual abuse. I went, okay, well, that's good to know. He said, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to do something for you. He said, but before we go any further, I am a practicing Luciferian. I went, right, okay. And he went, I go there because it's justice. I can curse those who hurt me in the name of Lucifer and get instant justice. So he said, so what you've done in speaking out, you've helped so many survivors have a voice, and it gives you hope. And he said, we know people attack you, because I got attacked online, I got trolled. I'll go into it a bit more in a minute, but I would get curses. I've had dead animals left outside my house. I've had these bizarre door bins of symbols, corn dollies, these little voodoo dolls. I had, almost like my son, I had liver failure, because one of the voodoo dolls that I got had a binding around the middle. And I ended up with liver failure in the exact place, and they'll have bindings around the mouth. I can send you some pictures of them. So these, and this guy said, well, what we're going to do, we're going to be holding a witch's moat for you for your protection. I went, well, I understand the sentiment, but no. My protection comes in the form of my Lord and my Saviour, but I thank you. So it made me understand why people are atheists. It made me understand why people do become Satanists. If you look at the mantra, like the laws, as it were, for the Church of Satan, it's not the most benevolent political party. They're against bullying. They're in tune with nature. There's all these things you think, wow, that sounds really cool. That's really good. But ultimately, it's about self-adoration, and it's the absence of a singular deity. You are God. You are, and when you look deeper into it, and you use intelligence, you realise, no, this is pure darkness. And that's how the devil lures people in with his promise of comfort. And people want revenge, because with justice comes healing, and our system does not give justice for survivors of abuse. When we see that Home Secretaries have been involved in paedophilia, under the last government inquiry, a former Home Secretary called Leon Britton was accused by many survivors of being involved in it. We had a former Prime Minister accused of it. And then we had a case more recently of they've just had a case go through the court in December last year, and that was a kids' home in Scotland, in Perthshire, called Fornethi. And it was a girls' school of girls for under respite care, and girls that are subject to sort of social what they call them, like maladjusted and things like that. They were just putting these kids from poor parts of Scotland and Glasgow into this girls' home. They were beaten. They're all Christian, so-called, or Episcopalian venues. They were put in there, and they were just pimped out. They would be taken to a nearby castle where these very wealthy men would rape them. And out of 20 girls that were raped and interviewed, 15 of them picked out one main abuser. And he was a guy called Lord Nicholas Fairbairn. And Lord Nicholas Fairbairn was head of the justice system for Scotland. He was in charge of the Procurator Fiscal. He was the Advocate Depute for Scotland. At the same time, he was having a long-standing and sort of almost open affair with a woman called Esther Ranson. And we all know what charity she set up, Childline. So, when the survivors see that, then, their heart drops. And then when we see what went on with the abuse in the Catholic Church, we look up what went on more recently with Bishop John Smythe, Bishop Peter Ball, who was the best friend of Prince Charles, and Smythe whipped, brutalised a young boy to death in some sadistic homosexual caning ritual he would have. Bishop Ball, one boy committed suicide because of the abuse they endured. Their hearts sink, and this is how evil works. It works on such a clever level, and people think, where can I go? Where can I go? And they just get let down. And that is why it's so important for us as Christians that, we need to keep ourselves as clean as we can. And the Ephesians says, the full armour of God. Because we are up against wickedness in the highest office. This abuse is satanic. It's evil to the core. You rip out a soul of a child when you rape them, when you sexually abuse them. Because what you do, you get a thing of pure innocence. And I was at my little granddaughter's sports day back in the summer. And she was in this running race and she won it because she's a good little athlete. And as she went running past me, she gave me a little smile and she went on to win this race. And my son, and he was the one that was dying and death's door, he heard this noise, looks behind, and I'm actually kneeling on the floor crying. But I'm inconsolable. There's nothing anyone can do. I was gone. I couldn't even talk. And he said, Dad, what are you doing? This is embarrassing. What's happened? What's the matter? And there was a parade of shops near the school. I said, there's a cafe there. I'm going to go in there. Meet me. I'll explain. And he came in and I said, I'm so sorry. I couldn't help myself. I said, but what I'd actually experienced was a thing called innocence. I'd seen pure innocence, right? In them kids having their race, having their, when they were high-fiving each other and all that. How dare anyone take that away from them? Yeah. Not only is it purity, it's powerful. So there is a power when they rob that kid of that. And not only do that, they then imprison that kid into a world of abuse, neglect, a greater propensity to carry on that abuse, alcoholism, heroin addiction, and ultimately suicide. And these are people that are doing this to these kids. How frightened must them kids be when that is done to them? And I saw it as my mission to bring this into people's front room. I think I'm not going to call it abuse. It ain't abuse. It's murder. It's murder of 3 generations. It is feeding hell directly. That's what it is. And what I found was that it knew no boundaries. I'm in not in partnership, but I'm working now with a group. Usually, it was people that had come from the poverty that were caught up in the abuse. Mainly, it was. I got approached by a group, and they wanted to thank me for what I talk about. But they said, "You're the only one who speaks about this," because I say what goes on in these fee-paying um, schools of privilege, the public school system, and the fact that, you know, whipping, beatings, and buggery were up until recently just deemed acceptable, and they did it because they had this twisted belief system that it edified the empire, you know, and it was the same belief system that the Greco-Romans used when they made gladiators. Take that boy before the age of 7, and I will show you the man. When they sodomize, a child, they destroy it. They cause a lot of damage physiologically, but also emotionally and spiritually. They cause a servitude to the system, you know, and they know what they're doing. And then they beat them down. They cane them. A grown man like Bishop John Smythe, who was a badminton champion, squash champion. Can you imagine the strength in his right arm?
Yeah.
As he, you know, beat down a cane on a little boy's bottom. And he had the endorsement of the Archbishop of Canterbury. You know, and I want to bring this back in. And of course I speak about this, and this group said, well, look, we set up a survivor collective. And part of their group is a bloke called Charles Spencer. Well, he had a famous sister called Diana. And he's, you know, so he even saw my work, right? And they said, look, you know, we want to thank you. So I'm in Parliament with them next week, campaigning. They've got the ear of some senior politicians, and I'll gladly do that. You know, but they thought that when they set their group up, they'd get maybe a dozen or a score of victims. They got 3,000. 3,000. And these are people that go on to feed Oxford, to feed Cambridge. They then go on to fill up the ranks of Sandhurst Military Academy, that go on to run these army elite units. They go on into the centres of commerce in the City of London, you know, the stock market and things like that. They are broken people. Some of them, it ends up breeding narcissism, because if you give a child two things, either too much love or no love at all, you know, and you don't boundary them, you cause narcissism, which is a feeder into psychopathy. So they're destroying them, you know. And how many of our prime ministers have gone to Eton? How many have gone there? I think it's 17. 17, you know. And also that these schools go on to fill our judiciary. How many senior Crown Court judges have been to these? I think it's something like 3/5 of them have. And they then adjudicate on cases. Are they going to betray their clan? I very much doubt it, you know. So it's ingrained in, and again, it feeds back to how apt your opening gambit was. That this is malevolence in high office, and they're destroying souls, and that's what they're doing. They are destroying souls, and we have to say no. We need to keep innocence, you know. But this whole thing is veiled in a curse. There is a curse put on any satanic ritual, any witch's mode. They open in a curse. They protect it in a curse. There are things called watchers in the demonic realm. And anyone that goes to expose this, they will come under attack. They won't realise it, but it will be a spiritual attack. It could be an accident, like my son experienced. Is it connected? I genuinely believe, without being a cuckoo conspiracy theorist, that was all part and parcel was my silencing. That there was a spiritual attack put on me because the devil knew what I was going to expose. Tens of millions, even Elon Musk has retweeted and forwarded my work. to the sums of tens of millions. Elon Musk, I never thought that would happen.
Yeah.
You know, my name has been mentioned by Theresa May many times. 19 times I've been mentioned in Parliament. You know, my work is subject to the records of Hansard's, which is a permanent record in Parliament now. I've given evidence at an independent inquiry. 5 new points of safeguarding law come out of my evidence. I never ever thought that would happen, but the devil knew that would happen.
John, I do apologise to interrupt because we've only got a few minutes left, but at this point, and maybe I should have said this at the beginning. Well, first of all, thank you for everything that you have said. And it's a bit like, especially when you go to America and they turn around and say, is anyone a veteran here? Anyone who served your country in the military? Please stand up. And there's a round of applause. And John, for whatever it's worth, I just want to thank you so far for your service and your continued service, because, and you, just in the sort of last minute, and I would like to ask and say, could we sit down again and do this when you've got time? Because I'd be honoured
happily,
to do
you know.
But
and I can elaborate on the ritual side of it as well.
But well, we need to. And I would like to talk about a friend of mine in America called Greg Reed, who has been at the centre of this. We can go into that whole term of the satanic panic and everything, which I think would be really good. But John, is to say we need to support you in prayer. But as you've talked about, unbelievable, incredible testimony. Yes, that brought tear to my eye. And when you were explaining about your son, and praise God for that, and an absolute miracle. But we need to be praying about this for you, and we need to be praying because when we do, things happen, and we can see that darkness push back. John, I just want to thank you for your time and thank you for everything that you have said. Frankly, the English language isn't good enough for me to express my gratitude, but also to encourage us to pray for you, because it is a spiritual battle. And also just to say, without being flippant, in other situations, you're then not given the opportunity to talk about this. And I thank you for it, because mainstream media may not go near it, but it needs to, because it needs to be exposed.
It's a conversation no one wants. It's a conversation we should all have. And you know, however squeamish it might be or repugnant people will feel, it's not happening to you, it's happening to these kids. You know, the grown men can't get a job because they defecate themselves because their anus is ruptured. And we need to talk about this. I'm fed up of people doing that. Oh no. I'm talking about nonsense. This is a conversation we need to have. And in the words of Edmund Burke, in order for the triumph of evil, it takes but for good men to do nothing. Everyone should be getting involved in this. You know, everyone. I mean, and prayer is a massive weapon for this. But my work's out there. People want to know what I do. Send my testimony to your MP. Send it to the papers. Send it to Channel 4. You know, I will stand up and I will be counted, because I will fear no evil. I will do what Jesus wants me to do, and I'm proud to serve him.
Amen. John, I'm going to play us out, but my sincere thanks. Please stay there and I'll say goodbye to you over the other side. And I look forward to doing this again, because it's so important.
And I apologise for my tardiness today.
No, you were brilliant. Thank you.